Good evening. I would like to call to order the September 1st, 2020 Little Rock City Board of Directors meeting. We would like to welcome those that are in attendance as well as those watching at home or streamlining online. We would also like to welcome Directors Hendricks, Richardson, Webb, Fortson, and Peck, who are participating via video conferencing. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Director Hendricks?
Present.
Director Richardson?
Here.
Director Webb?
Here.
Director Peck?
Here.
Director Hines?
Present.
Director Wright?
Here.
Director Compuris? Director Fortson?
Here.
Director Adcock?
Present.
Vice Mayor Wyrick?
Present.
Mayor Scott?
Present. Let me now take this time to recognize City Attorney Tom Carpenter, who will conduct our invocation.
Please join me. Right now, we keep hearing defenses and challenges and reactions of things that at the heart of the matter really aren't what we see as America, as this county, as this state, as this city. As we come together tonight, let us have the spirit of seeing what America will be as one together, instead of hearing 1,000 voices trying to defend what it has been, that we all know is not what we want. Let us use our minds, our hearts, our experiences, and let us be willing to listen to those with experiences far different from our individual experiences, so that as we reach action tonight, it is in the best interest of all and not in the single interest of one. Amen.
Maybe I'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
and to the
republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, if you would please read the consent agenda.
The consent agenda consists of a motion to approve the minutes of the July 21st, 2020 and August 4th, 2020 Little Rock City Board of Directors meetings, a resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Escamilla Excavating LLC in an amount not to exceed $396,302.70 for the Latrice Drive Drainage Improvement Project and for the purposes funding from the 3/8 cent capital improvement sales tax and the limited tax general obligation capital improvement bonds. A resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Vortex Aquatic Structures International for a total contract amount of $450,000 to construct and install a splash pad and make improvements at Crump Park and for the purposes funding from the 3/8 cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Landscape Structures for a total contract amount of $71,643.78 to install synthetic turf for the Dunbar Community Center Playground and for the purposes, a portion of the funding from the 3/8 cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with CXT Concrete Buildings in amount not to exceed $125,000 for construction services for the Hyndman Park Restroom Project and for the purposes, a portion of the funding from the 3/8 cent capital improvement sales tax. A resolution to express the willingness of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas to utilize Arkansas Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism Outdoor Grant Program funds to authorize the city manager to execute any and all necessary applications, agreements, and contracts for its administration and for the purposes. A resolution to express the willingness of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas to apply for and utilize federal aid, transportation alternative program, and surface transportation program grant funds for a shared use pedestrian and bicycle trail to be known as the Tri-Creek Greenway and for the purposes of funding from a portion of the funding for the 3/8 cent capital improvement sales tax. To authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with McClellan Consulting Engineers Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $150,866 for design and engineering services of the Western Hills Master Plan and for other purposes, a portion from the funding from the 3/8 capital improvement sales tax. A resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Game Time in an amount not to exceed $515,000 for the construction and installation of a pavilion and modular playground structure for Western Hills Park and for other purposes, a funding from a portion of the funding from the 3/8 capital improvement sales tax. A resolution to authorize the city manager to renew contracts for a one-year term with Pulaski County Community Services in a total combined amount of $382,346.80 for housing opportunity for persons with AIDS and for other purposes. A resolution to authorize the city manager to enter into a 5-year enterprise license agreement with SHI Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $909,144 plus applicable taxes and fees for VMware service, support, maintenance, and licensing, and for other purposes. A resolution to extend the South Main Temporary Improvement District for approximately 9 consecutive weeks, starting September 1st, 2020, and ending on October 31st, 2020, and for other purposes. That concludes the consent agenda.
Move for the adoption of the consent agenda.
There's a motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. We'll now move into, before we move into our citizens' communication, I think it's definitely good to share that, as City Director Peck often says, that we are a city in a park. We just passed about $2.5 million in parks projects and improvements in a number of different areas of our city, and I think that's just something that's worth mentioning as we move forward. Citizens' communication will now have, I think we have 2 we have to read. We'll start with those that have to read first.
This one was sent from Daniel Parnell with the subject line of Little Rock Police Department reform. Hello, I'm a citizen of the City of Little Rock, writing to express my support for policies that would increase accountability in the Little Rock Police Department. The city's police force demonstrates a clear history of wrongdoing and internal acquittal, and much more oversight is needed to ensure that they do not cause more needless injury or death. I also believe that police should not respond to health emergencies or other nonviolent situations, which should be handled by social workers or health professionals. The policies I support include more police budget dedicated to training and crime prevention, more investment in emergency and social services to handle nonviolent calls, no more militarization of police forces, permanent firing of officers who show a pattern of excessive force or racism, external reviews of officer misconduct by an independent agency, no more paid leave for officers under investigation for excessive use of force, timely release of documents related to police misconduct. Now more than ever, the public is paying attention to the actions of our city and its leadership. I hope that the board considers supporting these necessary reforms that will ensure the continued safety of its citizens. If not, I can assure you that we will be energized to elect leaders who will meet our needs come election season. Thank you, Daniel Parnell, Ward 6.
Thank you, sir. Next item to read.
From Daryl Turner, subject line, letter to the Board of Directors. Good morning, Board of Directors. My name is Daryl Turner, Jr. I'm a senior and theater major at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I spent 4 years in the United States Air Force, where I worked at Kirtland Air Force Base as security forces. I was recently notified by my friend Max Campbell that you were calling on a vote for some things for the city. First off, I completely agree that there should be a redistribution of police funds within their allocated budget to better fund training and crime prevention. When I was in the military, I basically had to go through the same training as a police officer, except we weren't allowed to have any gray area. We had to be able to 100% justify anything we did to a civilian. Things like firing into a vehicle should not be allowed. We would get court-martialed if we were to fire into a vehicle, regardless of what the person did or had. Due to recent events, the world as we know it has changed. Just this year, Arkansas has been hit with COVID-19, a tropical storm, an earthquake, and 2 tornadoes, amongst other problems happening within the state. We absolutely need greater investment into emergency programs and social services. If we had more hospitals, equipment incorporated, we would be better prepared as a whole for any other disasters, as well as funding more social workers whose skill sets are far more superior in handling civilians having a mental health crisis. We do not need militarization of the police. All that does is induce fear amongst the people and give people who are dealing with their own mental health issues to use excessive force on civilians. We do not need more weapons to keep our people safe and to save lives. If that were the case, healthcare practitioners would carry around firearms. There are far better ways for riot control. For example, our government officials could actually listen to the people and tend to their complaints like actually doing their job. There should absolutely be a permanent termination of police officers who are repeat offenders for excessive use of force. I enlisted into the United States Air Force at the age of 18 to serve my country. I felt a sense of duty, knowing that I would go to war, get hit with an RPG, and be reduced to a pink mist. When I got in, one of the first things I was taught was de-escalation techniques. We were taught to meet the civilian with the appropriate amount of force. No need to draw a weapon if the civilian is just running their mouth, even if they threatened us. We just have to raise our alertness. Officers should adhere to the same laws that they enforce. They should not be allowed to return to work if they can't be what they were hired to do, and that is being integrados. I'm on board with all the other points that were brought to me, including an external review of officers doing wrongdoings and paid leave for officers under investigation for excessive violence, and a timely release of documents relating to officer-related shootings and other incidents. As an African American, these issues mean so much to me, and I appreciate the fact that we have people stepping up and willing to implement change and not just talk about it. Best regards, Daryl.
Thank you so much. Ms. Dawn Jeffrey.
Hello, my name is Dawn Jeffrey. I'm Ward 5 with Ms. Wright. I'm a local community activist, Ward 6, sorry, with Ms. Wright. I'm a local community activist and concerned citizen. I've been to this board before and plan to continue until real action is taken. This means going beyond meetings and actually implementing and enforcing policies that will protect the citizens from the police. We are here today because we are deeming that this is a People's City Hall meeting. We are occupying City Hall today because of the ignored cries of the people to protect us from the police. We are declaring a state of emergency, as should every state in the nation that allows police to beat, rape, and murder their citizens without repercussions. We will not yield until the City Board of Directors agrees to put following resolutions on the agenda, as well as taking real actions. That means actually doing something, not just hosting meetings. So we want the money rebudgeted that was assigned to the police force, extra money. We want that rebudgeted and reallocated to communities so it is equally distributed, if not more. Preventative programs, mental health programs, work programs with living wages. We also want the Little Rock Citizens Review Board to be appointed by the people and not appointed by the mayor. Time after time, we see corruption of the LRPD be swept under the rug instead of defunding the police, which is a totally flawed enforcement system. We continuously refund the police. There is already plenty of funding within the department to meet these requests, even if you reallocate some of the funds. We would love and demand that you remove the corrupt officers from the force, because there are a list of several who are still serving on the force currently. Last month, even several protesters were attacked by Blue Lives Matter sympathists, white supremacists, cops in plain clothes. LRPD and Capitol Police just stood there watching. Little Rock Police Department Chief and Little Rock Capitol Police both exchanged messages with Blue Lives Matter sympathizers, arranging the meetup of Black Lives Matter protesters and other protesters that are organizing, fighting for the liberation of our people. Some officers went as far as to falsify reports to portray sympathizers as victims, when they and the white supremacists incited the violence. The officers are allowed to continue to do this. The city is well aware of the incident that happened. None of these officers have been reprimanded, but they have been allowed to file false reports. Adrian Thompson was just tased in the eye by the LRPD a few weeks ago. LRPD still hasn't released information about the incident that resulted in the loss of Adrian's eye, the name of the officer, nor what he has to do. I request more time from the board.
Ms. Jeffrey, as you know,
I request more time from the board.
as you know, we only do 3 minutes during citizen communication.
I
And
request more time from this board.
as you know, D'Angelo,
One of the most egregious
Carrie
affairs
Hodge.
was that unwarranted murder of Bradley
Carrie Hodge, you're
Blackshire
up.
by cowardly Charles Starks on February
Carrie Hodge,
20,
if you don't show up,
22nd,
then you won't have your
2019.
opportunity to speak.
This man has been given a license to kill, being reinstated
Ms.
into
Jeffrey,
the
we
force
understand
of their
what you-
conduct. The city makes it clear where they
Matthew
stand
Ramsey,
in
you're
regard
now
to
up.
criminal behavior when they protect officers like Charles Starks.
Max
Mayor
Campbell,
Frank Scott
you're now
says
up.
the city of Little Rock is above the curve, but that is a lie.
Luke
We are
Scraven,
behind the
you're
curve,
now
if
up.
not in it. The city continues to do is sprinkle breadcrumbs with no ache. We demand that these officers be removed from the force.
Ms. Jeffrey,
Brian Harper, Jamal Lovelace, Jessica Eubanks, Josh Blake. We've sent these demands. We the people. We want an immediate end to police brutality, rape, and murder. The people demand the right to elect members of the Citizens Review Board. We demand an immediate end to building new jails or detention centers, building jails that promotes the urgency to fill them. We demand an immediate end to over-policing impoverished communities and neighborhoods, primarily of color, with the sole intention of filling these prisons
turn
for
off the
profit.
mic.
We demand police-free schools. We demand the police be defunded and divest money into the communities. We demand these funds be used for cleaning up our communities, parks, recreation, as well as feeding impoverished communities. We demand these charges against protesters be stopped. We demand the full reevaluation of the laws that do certain trivial acts, crimes to send someone to prison for. When people are speaking about issues of Black lives in the state of emergency, if y'all say y'all are concerned, y'all should be willing to speak. We demand some of the prisons and jails be used for imprisoning officers.
Officers.
for committing crimes. We demand all police unions be dissolved. We demand police have to live in these cities. We demand that they're not allowed to drive the police cars home. We demand that
It is
police
a-
demographics match the demographics of the community. We demand the uncoupling of health emergencies responses from law enforcement. We
It's
demand
peaceful.
to withdraw participation in police militarization.
It's peaceful.
programs. We demand the elimination of gang and vice units. We demand police departments end the use of unpaid administration leave of law enforcement officers under investigation for physical, sexual, racial, and violence of any kind. We demand a punishment for the officers equal to the punishments of the citizens that do the same crime. We demand the department cease asset forfeiture programs. We demand a cap for overtime accrual and or pay for military exercises. We demand the termination and disqualification from pension and rehiring law enforcement officers who have engaged in physical, sexual, and racial violence. We demand decriminalizing drug, traffic, and poverty-related offenses. We demand timely release of information of officer-involved shootings and abuse of power incidents. We demand the department immediately take any officer into custody that commits a violent crime. We demand police accountability. Police cannot investigate and clear themselves. We demand independent investigations of all officers involved shootings by the entity not related to the
officers, we're going to, if everyone back up, that we'll continue on with the board meeting and allow them to be peaceful, but if all the officers will back up, please. We'll continue on with the board meeting.
Create real checks and balances for police brutality. We will not no longer allow the city.
Our citizens' communication has now been.
We will no longer allow this city to sprinkle breadcrumbs and do this
now
city an
moving into
injustice.
a
We
public hearing.
demand that these offers are prosecuted, demanding starting with Charles Starks.
took care of
You
this,
fired Charles Starks, but you didn't stand behind
Now-
your word. You should have.
We are now going to open into a public hearing for item number 13. Madam Clerk, if you would, please read the ordinance for the first time.
An ordinance to approve the partial right-of-way abandonment of the east 15 feet of the 80-foot wide Polk Street right-of-way located adjacent to 5423 Hawthorne Road in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, and for the purposes, first reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on second reading.
Second.
There's a motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. Second reading.
An ordinance to approve the partial right-of-way abandonment for the east 15 feet of the 80-foot wide Polk Street right-of-way located adjacent to 5423 Hawthorne Road.
Thank you for sharing your message.
Second reading.
Thank you so much.
Move to suspend the rules and place on third and final reading.
Second.
The motion is second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. Second reading.
An ordinance to approve the partial right-of-way abandonment for the east 15 feet of the 80-foot wide Polk Street right-of-way located adjacent to 5423 Hawthorne Road. Third and final reading.
We've had our three readings. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing.
Oh, we're now closing the public hearing. We had the public hearing open. We've now closed it. We've had our three readings. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. Are there any questions from the board before we move for adjournment?
We got
You got 14.
14.
Oh,
It's another public hearing.
we're now opening for public hearing for the public hearing for item number 14.
An ordinance to abandon a 60-foot utility and drainage easement located at 16801 Chenal Parkway at the southwest corner of Chenal Parkway and Canis Road in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, and for the purposes, first reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on second reading.
Second.
There's a motion second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. Third reading.
An ordinance to abandon a 60-foot utility and drainage easement located at 16801 Chenal Parkway at the southwest corner of Chenal Parkway and Canis Road, second reading.
Move to suspend the rules and place on third and final reading.
We've now had three readings. All those in favor,
That was
please.
second reading.
That was second reading. We'll now move to the third reading.
We got to vote on that motion.
You've got the
We
We had a
motion.
motion and a second.
Move we suspend the rules and place on third reading.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it.
An ordinance to abandon a 60-foot utility and drainage easement located at 16801 Chenal Parkway at the southwest corner of Chenal Parkway and Canis Road, third and final reading.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it.
Close the public hearing, please.
We're now closing the public hearing. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Ayes have it. Motion passes. Board members, any more questions for the board today? Before we get to, well, I got some final comments.
Ellie.
Director Computers. So before who do we have online first? So we got Director Computers, Director Webb, and Director Hendricks. Did you have something to say still as well? I want to make sure because I know you had some technical difficulties. Can you hear us, Director Hendricks?
I have nothing to say.
Okay, awesome.
Ellie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Computers.
Frank, these are some questions that you may have to find out about from our discussion last week about, or 2 weeks ago, about the insurance. Is the $1.2 million going to be not charged, or is there going to be actual money given back to the city?
From my recollection, are you talking about
The insurance.
for the premium for December?
Yeah.
It will not be charged for the month of December.
Okay. So,
And we can transfer those savings, which will create a net reduction of $130,000, I believe.
but part of that is staff, is employees' money. What percentage of that 1.2?
No, that 1.2 is only our savings. We haven't computed the employees because we were only sticking to the budget. So that 1.2 represents us.
What would be the total premium for a month with the city and us together?
Do not have that answer, but the only thing that reflects the budget is the 1.2 is what I'm,
Okay.
so generally, we have to, so when you look at it globally, you take what we pay as a city, because we pay a large percentage of our insurance for our employees, and the employees pay a portion of it. And so when it comes to the budget, we're only sticking to what we are paying, not what the employees are paying.
So so in 2021, are the employees getting anything to offset the 7% increase?
We are handling that net reduction based on the savings we're getting from the 1.2. What I'll do, just to have you a better explanation, I'll just get,
Okay.
we'll get an email to you, to the board.
Okay.
Bruce, if you'll remind me, just get an email to the board from Stacy on that particular question.
I have a question about the insurance also.
Yes, ma'am.
Are the employee spouses, the money that the employees pay for their families, are there going to be any charges for that in December? Are they going to also not pay December? Because that's what I'm being asked. Are the employees going to save what they now pay on their family plans?
We'll get you that answer.
Okay.
Again, I want to make sure everyone's aware that discussion was related to the budget line item. We can get you that employee information. That's
But
what
then
you're
we
asking.
start getting phone calls from the employees saying, I'm not going to have to pay my insurance in December for my spouse and my family, and we couldn't answer that, so.
So, would you like me to clarify?
Yes, Mr. Moore.
The number that, the premium number is related to the city's portion.
So there's no savings to the employees that's paying the home, their family policies.
That's correct.
Here, could we see if maybe we could get the insurance company to do that for the families also? Because it doesn't seem quite fair. We're getting a big benefit, but our employees are not getting that benefit.
Well,
Yeah.
in essence, though, by doing this, the benefit is for 2021 where there's no increase. We would be facing an increase, employees would be facing an increase, but by forgiving the premium, there will not be an increase in 2021. So that's where the savings is going forward.
Bruce, we're having the same question. Could you just map out how $1.2 million helps the employees? I think that's the big issue.
I would like that information too, and I'm sure the employees would like it. Thank you.
And the other thing, a tax attorney asked me, if you do this, is it a taxable benefit?
Ernie.
I'm not a tax lawyer.
What we'll do at the next, we have a policy meeting. We will ensure that our HR director's here as well as Mr. Tom Kane, and we'll just do it.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
That was not the question.
I have here, I guess this was given during citizen communication, but on the back of it, it lists our Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission and some policies that they would like us to address as a board. And the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission, that's their role, is to submit for our considerations policies that we as a board can enact. And so I would like us to consider these as we move forward, and especially as we go through our budget process. There's several on here that interest me personally. We've already got the Citizens Review Board, but I am interested in the crisis intervention because I do know there's a lot of mental health issues out there, and our officers are not trained to deal with persons that are having mental health issues. So I think that's a very viable policy suggestion that they're recommending here. And I do believe we have comprehensive training for implicit bias, but if we don't, I'd like to see that. And anything else that they're recommending here that we feel that we can move forward on, I would like us to consider as a board, but especially those two.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Director Hines?
Thank you. I have one question for Tom. Could you give us an update on where we are with Mr. Akins and the Civil Service Commission? Are you at liberty to discuss that?
Yes, they sent the wrong transcript. We got the right transcript. And as I told Director Wright, I thought yesterday was Labor Day when I set my vacation, and everybody kind of set it around mine. So I've got the transcripts and the pleadings, and I'm preparing a memorandum or a letter to deal with his lack of qualifications.
Thank you. And Mayor, I wanted to, I put something in all of the Board of Directors seats. It's something I signed on today. It's called the Police Pledge. It's kind of interesting that all comes out tonight as we've had some discussion of defunding the police. Anyway, I put it's a totally voluntary thing. It's from Heritage Action for America. It just states a lawful society free from mob rule and violent insurrection is not possible without law enforcement. Police officers have chosen a noble profession. They dedicate their lives to upholding the law and protecting the sacred rights of their fellow citizens. As a profession, they deserve support and respect. I stand with America's police and pledge to oppose any bill, resolution, or movement to defund the police. And I've signed it today, and I've posted it on social media, but I would encourage any of my fellow directors that like to sign on to it, and the mayor, if you would like to. I think it sends a clear message to our LRPD officers and our Pulaski County Sheriff's deputies that are out on patrol every night. As a personal item, I have made it stand, I've made it publicly, and I will state it in this venue. I will never vote to defund the police in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I will fight tooth and nail to keep that from happening. I think we have one of the best police agencies, not only in the state of Arkansas, but in this nation, as certified by CALEA, our third-party police certification. We're running 21st century policing efforts. The mayor's also made changes to get us up to date with some of the newer issues, so I commend him on that. But I think we have a fine police department, and I'm not going to stand by and let them put their lives on the line every day and not stand up behind them because they're standing in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Hines. Any more from Vice Mayor Wyrick? Director Webb? Director Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question. Are we going to have the sales tax presentation tonight? Or the budget presentation?
We're gonna, we can, yes. We were moving kind of swiftly, but if you would like, we can email or have it tonight. Which one would you prefer?
I had a few questions.
All right.
After reading it, that I just wanted to ask Director Linehan, please.
Sure. Well, Director Linehan, we do have you on the agenda, so you can come. Yes, we're ready for you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. I'm going to go through the city's financial results through June 30th. So if we look at the first page of the report, you'll, of course, recall that mid-June is when, or mid-March is when COVID hit. So we've had 3.5 months now of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Our blue line represents the 2020 revenues. Through June, the city has recognized 44.54% of the annual revenue budget, and this compares to 48.29% the same period of 2019. Many of our revenues, as we move to the next slide, and I'll be talking through the presentation, many of our revenues are somewhat seasonal in nature. They do not all come in a 12th, every month. It would be much easier to budget if they did. But we'll be talking about that in detail as we move forward. So you can see on this slide that through the end of June, Our revenues were $92,588,850. That compares to $97,752,670 the same period a year ago. And one half of our annual budget would be $103,944,710. These revenues are not including the transfers in. So with those numbers, our revenues are approximately $11.4 million below one half of the budget, but they're $5.2 million below the same period a year ago. And that is due to a lot of the timing differences. So on the next slide, we'll look at the comparison. We'll move to the next slide. There. So our general property tax revenues, on this, it appears that they're $2.3 million below budget, but that's due to the timing that we receive those revenues. When you look at it in comparison to the same period a year ago, we're less than $100,000 different. The growth that we receive from the county in the original charge is 4% for the year. We do not see anything really that indicates that that is not going to hold true. But the timing of collections is a little bit slower than the same period last year. Property taxes are not due until mid-October. When you look at the sales tax, because sales tax receipts are heaviest in the fourth quarter of the year, it appears that our sales tax revenues are below budget. But as I get into the detail slide, you'll see that we are actually ahead of where we forecast that we would be through the end of June, and we're ahead of the same period a year ago. Our business licenses and permits are approximately $2.5 million above budget, and that's because the business license portion of licenses and permits is due on January 1st of the year. And we had collected over 95% of that annual budget so far this year. The portions of licenses and permits that are trailing budget, primarily the mixed drink supplemental payments that we receive from restaurants and bars, those are at 34% of the annual budget, and they have decreased 36%, or approximately $570,000 from the same period a year ago, primarily due to the closures of restaurants and bars in mid-March due to the pandemic. Building and related permits are at approximately 45.6%, excuse me, of the annual budget, and they have decreased approximately 6% from the same year ago, but they have been gaining momentum here in the last month or so. Our intergovernmental revenues, which account for $5.2 million of the variance, those are due to the timing of our annual pension turnback funds that we receive from the state that go towards our closed police and fire pension funds and our active police and fire employees that participate in LOPFI. That is received 100% in the month of July, so we'll see that in our next report. Charges for services. This is one area that is truly below budget. You'll see the $3.4 million in comparison to $5.8 million the same period a year ago. These are the revenues that are attributed to zoo admittance, our golf courses, the fitness center, the river market, the various activities where we charge a fee. Those are all suffering due to the pandemic. Fines and fees. Also trail budget. They typically trail budget in the first quarter of the year due to the portion of fees that get pulled back into the previous year that are collected in January and February that are for tickets that were issued before the end of the year. But when you exclude that adjustment, the revenues are trailing budget by just under $400,000, and that's primarily due to the suspension of court activities beginning in mid-March due to the coronavirus. Traffic court has implemented a virtual court cyber docket, but based on data from the state, the county, and local officials, it does not plan to reopen until October. I believe the criminal court has plans to reopen in the next month. I'll go into detail on franchise fees in just a moment. On the next slide, you see the comparison of our revenues to the same period a year ago, and as I mentioned, this is the more accurate comparison. It doesn't account for the growth that we built into the budget, but it does show you the impact of timing and then also those revenues that are truly trailing the previous year. So you'll see our sales tax revenues are actually ahead of budget. All of our other revenues are trailing where we were the same period a year ago. I've already talked about the licenses and permits being related to the mixed drink supplements and the permits as opposed to business licenses. And we've also talked about the fines and fees. The $1.7 million unfavorable variance, though, in miscellaneous revenue is because last year we received a transfer, or we received, a contribution from Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau for just over $1.7 million in order to retire the debt on the Cromwell building. So that was not budgeted to recur this year. We are not below budget in that area, but that makes up $1.7 million of the negative comparison of $5.1 million. So when you take that out of the picture, our revenues are still about, I would say, $3.5 million less than what we anticipated or compared to the same period a year ago. And you'll recall that the budget amendment that we made in mid-April reduced our expenditures by just under $5 million. So year-to-date, we're still, we did that in anticipation of the revenue losses that we would experience with COVID. And so we're still ahead of the game on that adjustment through the end of June. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about our sales taxes. So as we move to the next slide, this is the chart that shows the trailing 24 months of sales tax revenues. You'll see that at the last 3 months is what we're going to focus on because we've talked about everything else previous to that. So June through August receipts, which are for the periods from April, May, and June revenues. In the April revenues decreased 3.34%. The May revenues decreased 2.65%, but May increased 5.83%. Now, as we talked about when I did the kind of coronavirus update a couple of weeks ago, I told you that we did not anticipate April's revenues to match prior year, and that's because last year we had a very unusual one-time spike in electric goods wholesalers category. So we actually expected April revenues in comparison to the same period a year ago to be down 4.61%, but they were only down 3.34%, so we beat our budget there. May's revenues did drop off slightly, and then June we saw an increase. Now this increase, as we look at the NAICS categories to see where our gains and our losses are, our gains are primarily in the areas you would expect. Grocery revenues are much higher. General merchandise, much higher. The internet sales, collection of catalog sales, much higher. Where we're seeing declines is in, also beer, wine, and liquor stores, much higher. Where we're seeing a decline is in our full-service restaurants and our bars, and also on the local level, we're seeing a large decline in our traveler accommodations. The interesting part is, and we'll see this more as I move forward, the city portion of the sales tax has been trailing the county portion for the last 3 months as far as growth goes. The county has actually exceeded the growth of the city. It's usually the reverse. But where the county's growth has been very high has been in major construction projects that are just in the county. So their iron and steel and building material and supplies are way up. And I think that has a lot to do with construction that's going on at the port with the Amazon facility and other construction that's going out there. And the city shares in that growth because we receive half of the county's allocation. And so that has really made a favorable difference to us over the last 3 months. Year to date, the local portion, the city's 1/8 sales tax that hits the general fund is down just 0.1%, basically flat from June, year to date June, the same period a year ago. The city's portion of the county tax is up 3.1% for the same period. So now as we look at the next slide, This just consolidates the individual lines that show the local and the county and the turnback funds into one combined growth rate. And so you'll see that we expected that dip. You see the green line drop down in June, which was for the April collections. It dropped down 3.4%, but you'll see that the budget was even lower than that. We had anticipated it to drop down more than 4%. The green line, which represents the budget, went back up to approximately 0.47%, which is what we've anticipated. But we are still up over the trailing 12 months. We're 4.78% more than the previous 12 months. Year to date, we're up 1.6% in comparison to our budget and 1.2% in comparison to the same period a year ago. So as we look at the next slide, that's a little easier to see. Our year-to-date sales tax collections are $52,766,770. That compares to a budget of $51,906,312. Again, you'll see on the budget column there, we had predicted approximately just a little under 0.5% growth for the year, with the exception of April. The June receipts for April revenues, you'll see the same thing in December when we had a one-time gain there when we get to December. But year-to-date, we're still $860,000 above budget when you look at the based on actual growth that we anticipated, which is 1.66%, and we're 1.2% ahead of the same period a year ago. So sales tax has been much better than what we would have anticipated over the first half of the year. I do want to remind you, though, that those results are in comparison to the same period a year ago before internet sales tax collection was required. That kicked in July last year. So the second half of the year, we will have to be in comparison to those periods where we saw some really nice growth in the second half of the year last year. So I do expect to see some declines as we move forward. On the next slide, you'll see the status of our 1 cent sales tax. So life to date, we have collected $420.2 million in new since the inception of the tax. $262.6 million supports operations. $157.6 million was dedicated towards capital projects. Year in 2020, $16.1 million has funded operations, and another $9.7 million has been deposited to the separate capital projects fund, the 3/8 cent sales tax that funded a lot of those parks projects that you approved tonight. Through the end of the second quarter, our 2020 revenue from the 1 cent tax is $25.8 million. And again, a slight decrease in comparison to the local tax from the same period a year ago, 0.1%. And again, that's really, really favorable when you think about the unusual growth that we had in the month of April last year. As you look at the next slide, we'll move into our franchise fees. The adopted budget for energy franchise fees was $14.5 million based on information that we received from Energy at the time the budget was prepared. The federal tax credits that were associated with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act have all expired. Through June, the revenues are trailing the monthly forecast that Energy provided by about $515,000. That's due to two things. One is we had very mild weather in the first part of the year during months that are typically much colder than they were. And then also, beginning in April, Energy reduced their energy cost rider by 3 to 7%, or they reduced their energy cost recovery rider, and they said that that would reduce revenues by 3 to 7%. They announced that to us in March. It took effect beginning in April, and we anticipate that that will reduce our franchise fee forecast that we received from Energy originally by about $500,000. So that's something we'll need to bring forward in our budget amendment, along with reductions to our charges for services and some of the other revenues we've talked about. On the next slide, we'll see our gas franchise fees. Those two have declined. Usage has declined 5.98% in the first half of the year. Revenue has decreased 9.15%. We were anticipating a decrease in the revenue due to the price of fuel, so our variance with the gas franchise fees is not as significant. It's only a few $1,000s. The rest of the variance in the franchise fees that we saw on the first table is really due to the timing of revenues. Again, our heaviest usage months for our franchise fees are in the very, very cold months and the very, very hot months. And so we have not gotten through all of that yet. I will also say that our water and our wastewater franchise fees are trailing budget as well. Part of that is due to all of the rain that we had in the spring and summer, which people did not have to water their lawns as much. Another part of that is with some of the COVID closures, some of the wastewater charges for some of the businesses and facilities is down. So we will have an adjustment associated with that. Next, we'll move on to our expenditures. So also through the end of June, while our revenues were below 50% of budget, so were our expenditures. Our expenditures were at 46.4% compared to 50.87% the same period a year ago. Half of our annual budget would be 50%. You know, not all of our expenditures are ratable every month, but they are definitely more consistent than our revenues are. If we look at the next slide, from the dollar perspective, we had expended $93.4 million of our expense budget compared to a budget of $100.5 million and compared to $101,395,983 for the same period a year ago. So while our revenues were below half of the annual budget by over $11 million, our expenditures were below half of the annual budget by $7.2 million. And they're $8 million below the same period a year ago. As we look at the next slide, we'll see the categories. So you see we have a large favorable variance in our executive administration department. That is due in part to the timing of our annual contributions for the other post-employment benefit plan. It's also due to the timing of vacation and sick payouts and to the timing of our outside agency funding contracts. You'll recall we suspended those contracts for a 120-day period, and so we're seeing some of the favorable variance associated with that. As you move down, criminal court had a variance in excess of 5%. Their savings is primarily attributed to reduced utilization of part-time staff. I mean, it's all primarily attributed to staffing, although their supplies were also down about $10,950. And again, the courts have been closed, so you would expect to see that. Human Resources has a favorable variance of $113,550. They have 3 vacant positions, but a lot of their favorable variance is also attributed to the timing of things like the civil service hearings, the contracts for the legal services and that have not been expended. On the next page, we'll look at our other expenditures. Public Works is below budget quite a bit. This is the building services component. And so we are below budget on some of our repairs and our utility expenses so far this year. The River Market has a significant favorable variance. The River Market closed in mid-March, again due to the coronavirus. So staffing and contracted expenditures were significantly reduced to the tune of $132,000.4 on staffing and $114,000 on some of the contracts. The expenditures, the reduction in expenditures has more than offset the lost revenue from the River Market of $199,000. On the fitness center, expenditures were below budget, $58,762 through June. Again, primarily part-time salaries and the timing of repairs and maintenance projects. It's partially offset by some capital improvements that they've made. Zoo expenditures are below budget by approximately $409,000. Again, reduced part-time expenditures savings in supplies and materials and in contracted services. However, the zoo's revenue loss is quite a bit more significant. So then we also have very favorable variances in fire and police. And those variances are primarily due to the timing of the pension contributions. Both of the police and the fire have their closed pension plans were merged with LOPFI in previous years. And so the timing of those contributions, we get billed a monthly rate from LOPFI that is only about half of what we actually contribute for the year. At the end of the year, we look at all the property tax revenue that we collected that was dedicated to those pensions, all of the turnback funds that we'll receive in July that are attributed to those pensions, and we make a lump sum contribution at the end of the year to pay down those unfunded liabilities. So that right now is creating a favorable variance in both police and fire of about $2.1 million. That is the majority of fire's variance. The remaining portion of their variance, favorable variance, is in repairs and maintenance. They're a little bit over on overtime, but it's more than offset by other savings. In the police department, again, $2.1 million of that is due to the timing of the pension contributions, and the remaining favorable variance of $865,000 is attributed primarily to vacancy savings and to the timing of supplies and maintenance expenses, a lot of it to do with fuel usage and things like that. Then on the debt service principal, line 23, that budget is associated with short-term financing notes. We currently have 5 short-term financing notes outstanding. We just made the payments on 2 of those notes in June. We had no payments prior to that. And just as I mentioned in the comparison to the same period a year ago when we were talking about the miscellaneous revenues, the comparison here on the principal is the retirement of one of the city's notes in January and also the note associated with Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau. So now we'll move on to our vacant positions. Savings from authorized but unfilled positions that was netted with our anticipated personnel cost for the budget purposes was $5.5 million. We anticipated that much savings just from turnover in positions and the time it takes to refill those positions. We had achieved $3,451,000 of that budget through the June 19th payroll. We did have a slight uptick in our budgeted positions that were vacant. We moved up to 129. We budgeted $1,250,000 for vacation and sick payouts, and through the end of June, we have expended $810,000 of that budget. In addition to the 129 vacant positions in the general fund, there were 67 other unfilled positions in the street and enterprise funds for a grand total of 196 authorized but unfilled positions. I usually highlight the police department there, and of the 129 vacant positions, 15 of those are police officers and 3 are higher level uniform positions, 3 sergeants. On the next slide, you'll see the kind of the trend line for our vacant positions. We dipped down just before March, and that was when we started both police and fire recruit schools. Those began, I think police began February 17th, fire began 3/16. And so then we've gradually ticked back up as we've had retirements and normal turnover. So that concludes my financial report through March. As I noted, the bright spot is our sales tax results through June that we just received on Friday, the 21st of August, and I believe we sent out that sales tax memo on the 24th. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Right.
I see Director Webb raising her hand, or waving.
Director Webb actually did it. We'll go to Director Webb first, Director Computers. She did ask first.
Sarah.
Director Computers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Director Webb first, then you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Linehan. That was very helpful, and you did answer some of the questions that I had from the sales tax report that you sent. I'm gonna email you some of my questions, but I do want to ask just a couple of things. I heard you mention the words a couple of times, but or maybe I heard you say this. But do we anticipate, or when do we anticipate a budget amendment?
Well, I had thought that we might begin to see a little bit more where our sales tax were going to go with the June receipts. I was really surprised when those actually increased. We're watching our revenues very closely. Our expenditures, I think we've got a good handle on. I do want to see another month or so of revenues, and then we'll be bringing forward an amendment that will reflect those reductions to our budget.
Okay, and if I could, just a couple more quick things, and then like I said, I'll email you the others. Can you tell me what the balance is? And I should know this. What's our rainy day balance?
So the restricted reserve fund is still at $10 million, and that combined with the general fund unassigned fund balance was 13% of our annual revenues as of the end of 2019.
Okay. And these last two questions are more general type questions. I know we have been approving some grants that we've gotten on some, like, I think I saw an announcement this week. We had $775,000 that was going, a lot of it into the homeless community for grants, and we've had some housing grants and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do we expect, and you may not be able to answer this, Sarah, do we expect to see more money coming down the pike for housing? Because I know the demand often outweighs what we are able to provide in terms of assistance.
I'm going to have to follow up with Kevin Howard and see if he's aware of what the trend is supposed to be for the housing grants. I know we are aggressively pursuing grants. We've got a lot of grants that are ongoing right now, not only associated with the coronavirus, but from the housing, from CDBG, and all for the coronavirus or areas impacted by the coronavirus that qualify for CDBG funds. And we are tracking all of those expenditures for grant reimbursement. As you're aware, most of those grants are reimbursement-based grants, so we have to spend the money up front and then apply for reimbursement. So that's one of the reasons that fund balance is so important.
Yeah, and this may be something that I need to ask Tad or Greg, Ramon, or other people. I know that there's a pretty high delinquent rate right now. I think it's well over $1 million in water and sewer, and do you know, or maybe city manager knows, are they making plans to work with customers? I think it's almost like up to $1.8 million in delinquent bills, and how are we going to assist the folks who have lost their jobs and that kind of thing, and are unable to pay those bills?
So there are 15,000 customers, which includes the entire CAW region, that are delinquent. We've been working with each of the utilities because, as everyone knows, they administer the billing system. And so the plan is to work with each of the customers, and Tad presented this to the CAW board, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. And the thought is that if you pay your bill, get current by September 30th, then you'll get some 10% type of discount. We spent a lot of time just yesterday talking about, okay, what do you do with the individuals who develop a payment plan for a period of, it could be 3 months, 6 months, and so that discussion just happened yesterday, and Tad's supposed to go back and talk to his customer service folks and get something back to me and Greg, and we'll talk about it here. But that's right now. The goal is all three of us said yesterday is not to really turn off anybody's service, especially in this time. I think Hot Springs and the city of Rogers started earlier, about 2 or 3 months ago. So the goal is to send a letter out from Tad in the next week or so. Tamika Edwards, who just started as his new chief of staff, was in the discussions yesterday. So I feel pretty good about the direction we're going.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Compuris. Then after Director Compuris, Director Adcock.
Sarah, 2 easy questions. When you look at the revenues from sales tax, did we decrease our projection when we made the corrections in our budget earlier in the year?
We did not adjust revenues at all in our April budget amendment. We did not adjust revenues. We only adjusted our expenditures based on anticipated declines in revenues. As in April, we've only received January and February revenues, so we don't have a lot of basis for an adjustment at that point.
So all of our projections were based on just decreasing costs, and we just guessed what the revenue was going to be, or we hoped what the revenue would be.
We took a preliminary adjustment. We knew that we were going to need a minimum of a $5 million adjustment. Actually, when our Treasury manager first initially forecast the potential reduction due to COVID, assuming a phase back in, he had anticipated it could be between $10 and $15 million. Fortunately, our sales tax revenues have held a little better, and some of our the offsetting purchasing, online, and people eating out and going to the liquor store frequently, those things have made up for some of the losses in other areas. Again, whether we anticipate that the impact will be heavier post July 1, even though there is some return to business activity, which is helping. But again, because we'll be compared to the same period last year when we were already collecting the internet sales tax. And that's been a huge growth area the first 6 months of the year.
And secondly, where and when do we start anticipating any funds from the feds that were allocated to cities to make up for budget?
Well, you remember in my presentations, there is no reimbursement or grant funding for lost revenue. The only thing that we can obtain reimbursement of is actual direct COVID-related expenses.
I know, but when do we expect that we're going to see that money? We spent, this is a little bit like the grants that you were asking Kathy about. We spent the money, now when do we get the revenue back? When do we get the money back?
The state just, finalized, I believe, the contract with their person who's going to be administrating that, and they've been working, the Municipal League has been working with them to get kind of the format for applying for reimbursements, and we expect to begin doing that, I think, in the next month. Bruce, do you recall what the time frame is?
Emily said yesterday that the DFNA said that September 24th, the application for reimbursement should be online.
Okay, and then when that comes, how do we account for that in our budget? Where do you put it in? Where at the end of the year, how does this, do we put it in the 2020 budget?
We can't account for it because it's not guaranteed. I mean, it's an application process.
Oh, I know, but
our expenditures right now are being captured in a special project, in a separate special project, so that we can identify and monitor and keep all of the requirements and decide which grant those expenditures should go against. If it's a grant from the federal government, then we track those expenditures in our grant fund. They're not in the general fund. They're in a grant fund, and we'll get the FEMA reimbursements and those kinds of things will offset those expenditures in the grant fund. For the CARES Act funding, that's not really exactly a grant, but it's similar in that we will be reimbursed direct expenses. And so we're tracking those in a special project fund. Those revenues, as they come in, will be matched with those expenses in the special project. But there may be a time period where we have, we're upside down, so to speak, where we've spent the money before we get reimbursement.
Right, but when you account for it, we spent the money out of general revenue.
No, we did not. We've spent it out, we've spent it from our special projects and our grant fund. I mean, the cash is coming from the general fund. The expenditures are not included in the general fund expenditures.
But that's what I'm saying, the money came from the general
Right.
fund. And it was put in a special fund and then sent back out. Correct? The COVID-related expenses, where did the money come from when we spent the money for testing and masks and all the things we've done?
The city has a combined bank account for all of the different sources of revenue. It's tracked by each individual fund where it will belong. So we're running a deficit in the grant fund right now, waiting for reimbursement. And some of that cash is coming from current cash receipts in our other fund. But they're kept tracked separately so we know what the balance in the general fund is versus grant funds.
Okay. Maybe you and I need to have this discussion later, but the money started out in the general fund, correct?
We have not transferred money from the general fund to the special project fund. Right now, we're just accumulating the expenses. The cash is coming from the city's combined bank account.
Then tell me, not today, but tell me how much we have expended
Okay.
in COVID-related activities since this occurred.
We can do that.
Director Adcock?
Mine has all gone the same area that Dean's was. How much have we spent that we're going to be getting reimbursed for? So as you prepare the information for him, I'd like to have a copy of it.
Sure.
Also
And
on
I
page
I gave an update a couple weeks ago, and I'm sorry I don't remember the grand total. I think at that time it was a little over $700,000.
Yeah,
I know.
think you're right.
Yeah,
You
I
all
know
were
we're-
emailed that from the last meeting, but we'll resend it.
But, and we have expended more since then. I know we've ordered computers and some things like that, laptops and things. So we'll have updated numbers. Those are being tracked by our procurement and emergency management division on a daily basis, so we can get that to you right away.
Okay, on page 15, under the golf.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to have more details on the golf since we closed the 2 golf courses. Mm-hmm. And I expected us not to be in the hole after we closed 2, and I noticed that we're in the hole. How long has the golf courses been open?
They reopened, I want to say, maybe on a very limited basis, late May, early June. But you'll notice if you look at the $802,000 we've spent in 2020, that's compared to almost, $1.3 million the same period last year. So we are trailing last year significantly.
It was the weekend after Father's Day, or the Saturday of Father's Day weekend.
It was
But you are sharing that
June.
we are actually below, correct?
Yes,
We're not in the hole.
I mean, we're below 6/12 of the annual budget, 1/2, but we always are this time of year because of the timing of golf activity. There's very little activity in the last quarter of the year.
I would like to know how First Tee is doing. I know they've had some golf tournaments, which they never had those before, I don't believe. And I'd like to know how their revenues and everything are doing.
Okay.
Okay, and then Dean asked my other questions, and if you'll get those answers for us, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Director Fordson?
Not a question, Mayor, just an update. Last month, when we were having our discussion on the financials, the entire question of timing and obligation for reporting, comparing city ordinances and state legislation came up, and you had asked me to work with Director Linehan on getting all of that information together to bring to this board so that we make sure, number one, we're doing everything as timely as possible, and number two, we're complying with all the various regulations or ordinances on our books and the state books, and number three, to see if any need to be changed. And I just want to report we have met, we are working on it, and we'll have a report just as soon as possible, recognizing there are a lot of other items on the table, but we should be able to come back with something on this in a relatively short time.
Well, thank you so much, Director Fortson. I know it was indeed a pleasure for Director Linehan to visit with you, and you guys have an accurate understanding of the complexity of our financial ordinances from many, many moons ago, and what we have to comply with now with GASB financial accounting methods and procedures. So thank you so much for your hard work and your leadership in that effort. Director Richardson.
I want to echo the point that Director Wright made about policies from the RCDC, the Race and Cultural Diversity Commission, which was formed to deal with issues that we quite frankly don't want to deal with in our city. Prior to the election of Bill Clinton as president, Arkansas was known based on one incident, and that was centralized integration or segregation. Excuse me. And while I'm a proud graduate of Central High, I think a lot of times we use these symbolic gestures of how far we've come with Central High as a way to deflect real attention on what we need to do and what's currently problematic in our community. And I've yet to see us adopt any policies presented to us by the Race and Cultural Diversity Commission. They were formed to deal with issues we quite honestly don't want to deal with, much less have a conversation this lengthy about issues that they brought to our attention. And I think since one of my colleagues used the word damn, I hope I don't get in trouble by saying the world looks a hell of a lot different from the bottom up than it does from the top down. And we need to recognize there's some issues in our community that we still need to address and look at and quite honestly do an honest, objective assessment of how far we've really come as a community. We want Little Rock to be a fair city for all citizens, not just a selected few. We need to have that conversation. I don't think any criticism of our police department is not supportive of our police department. I think that any objective assessment should be utilized for every department that we have in our city. I think that the assumption that everything that they're doing right now is correct across the board creates this sacred cow mentality. And we know that all institutions, including us, have room for improvement and need to look at improvement. And we've yet to have any discussion, whether it's residence requirement, whether it's take-home car policy that has to deal with how we're functioning as a police department. And that's one of the things that we need to address as a community, and that we seem reluctant to address, quite frankly, quite honestly. And it's problematic for me to have this as an issue that we reluctantly talk about, don't want to talk about. And we don't have any sacred cows in our community, and there's room for improvement across the board. The mere fact, the common mantra that we hear is that not all police are bad suggests that something is quite wrong. I never hear us say that all doctors are bad, not all lawyers are bad lawyers. There's something there that we need to look at, and I don't think that any criticism or request for an objective, not a selective, an objective assessment is not supportive of the police. I'm supportive of the police from the top down, from the chief and mayor to you who hired the chief. But any criticism of the police department doesn't mean that I'm not supportive of them. But I don't think that every institution that we're operating from is perfect. I don't think that the police department is perfect. I don't adopt and I don't address the defund the police kind of notion, but I think we can look at reallocating police funding. I think that some of my colleagues have made ill-informed comments about our history of our PIT funding over the last 27, 28 plus years without recognizing that 25 years we have not had any treatment. Any treatment. When we first started this, we had prevention, intervention, and treatment. We have not had treatment in 25 years. And a lot of issues that are happening in our community are mental health issues, substance use, substance abuse issues that are social ills that need to be addressed in other ways than law enforcement. And I think we need to have a clear understanding, clear recognition that we're not providing treatment anymore. We haven't done that in over 25 years. And a lot of people giving this incorrect historical perspective of PIT don't even know that that $3 million was not an arbitrary figure. That was based on a formula. And I know Dean was part of that group in Future Little Rock that helped address the passage of PIT with the addition of additional police officers. That $3 million was based on hiring 45 officers a year for 3 years for a total of 135 new officers. That's what that $3 million was based on. It wasn't an arbitrary figure that somebody pulled out of the air. It was based on a formula, based on a set of criteria, because we couldn't get any public sales tax passed without any mention or any notion that we're going to go dollar for dollar. Every dollar for police is going to have every dollar for police prevention, intervention, and treatment. And I think we need to be really, really careful that we don't create a sacred cow kind of mentality, because they start operating from that standpoint, and we really don't have any accountability. True accountability, any constructive criticism of the police or us, doesn't mean we're not supportive of the police. Doesn't mean they're not supportive of us as board members. But there's no sacred cows in our city. And we need to understand that, and we need to look at it. And Doris made a great point about us not utilizing any policy recommendations from the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission. Much less had a conversation this lengthy about any of the issues they brought to us that we don't want to deal with as a society, as a community. And I don't think that we judge our progress based on where we were in 1957 as a point that we want to start from in terms of our humanity, because we weren't, that was horrible, it was terrible. But we have these symbolic, I'm a proud graduate of the best high school in the world. But these symbolic gestures we have every 10 years takes our focus off on the work that we need to be doing right now, today. Unfortunately, we have 2 cities within the city, and any institution that we don't want to have an objective assessment of, that creates problems for me. And me having a request for any look at whether it's public works or parks, doesn't mean I'm not supportive of them. I'm supportive of the police department, from the chief down, including you, Mayor. You hired our chief. So any support, I think, needs to start at the top down. And I just find it interesting and problematic that sometimes we couch criticism or any kind of assessment as not being supportive. And that's for a very select few institutions. And I just wanted to make sure that comes across, and at some point in time, hopefully, we'll have a conversation based on some of the recommendations we received from RCDC, the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission. Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission, which is something we should be pushing for, with diversity in our community, diversity in our city, improving outcomes for all our citizens. We haven't done any treatment in 25 years. And a lot of these issues are mental health treatment issues, they're substance abuse, substance use issues, not necessarily law enforcement issues. And I think that's how we get distracted. And that's how, one of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. So that's all I had to say on that, man. I had to chime in. I thought that was interesting that we had those points that Director Wright brought up and then that Lance brought up. And I'm supportive of the police. Mayor, I'm supportive of the chief from the top down, including you who hired the police chief. So I think we need to be cognizant of what kind of message we send when we say we're not going to examine or be constructive criticizing any institution in our city. I think that's the wrong message to send to those institutions and the people working with them. And thank you, Mayor, for letting me have that minute to say something.
Thank you so much, Director Richardson. Do appreciate your comments. Any more comments from Board Members? Director Adcock?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to report on our census. We have now done census on about 1,400 plus people to the tune of $42 million. $15 million of that came from the grocery stores over the last 4 weekends when we did the census at 4 grocery stores each weekend. And 916 of those came from the food box drives, and that was $27 million. So we are now $42 million over the 10-year period on our census. Also, on the food boxes, we have given away over 9,000 food boxes since July the 2nd. And I think that's very good for our city.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. We definitely commend the city team members led by our U.S. Census Committee, Complete Count Committee, led by Mr. Charles Blake and Maricela, and the entire team of volunteers, and very grateful, Harriet Phillips as well, and others that are a team of volunteers that have been able to really work alongside you, Director Adcock, to ensure that we get those hard to count, hard to reach areas, as well as Director Webb with her definitely talents within the food arena as well, and helping us with Mosaic Church and others. So just want to commend all those that are involved, from our city team members to members of the board, as well as our team of volunteers. Those have been some hot Saturdays from 9 a.m. to noon. I didn't know that Mr. Moore knew how to sweat, and so I was happy to see him come out as well.
I did talk to Congressman French Hill today, and he is trying to ensure that we'll be able to give out food boxes in Phase 3.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any more comments from the board? First, I just want to share some final comments, and then we'll move swiftly to adjournment. As you know, our city and our nation continues to be in this period of social and civil unrest. One might say, in my generation, being a millennial, and those coming after us, we had ample time to read the history of the civil rights movement, understanding what it means from what was called the Big Six and those leaders that led during the civil rights movement to have the freedoms that we have today in this current movement. One might say this is our generation's Emmett Till moment, and what has spawned what we've seen across this nation in a period of protest. And one of the things that we focus on as we focus together, this administration's internal why has always been to unite the city, to unite Little Rock, helping us to move from being disconnected to connected. And when we do that, to ensure that we are moving from platitudes, that we have to always move towards policies and proactive action. And so one of those things that this administration, in lockstep with this city board, we've led the way in this state as it relates to justice and accountability reforms. This board has passed a numerous number of different things as it relates to justice and accountability from the standpoint of working with our police chief and the police leadership to have a banning of chokeholds, to ensure that we've added a duty to intervene policy, to ensure that we've created a citizens review police board to have greater trust built between the community and the Little Rock Police Department. We've also focused on a number of different policies to ensure that there's accurate communication that is coming from all of us. But even in that accountability standpoint, we've purchased body-worn cameras, something that hasn't been done. We ensure that our budget reflects our priorities of justice and accountability. And so that's what this board, this administration has done. There's always going to be more work to do. We understand the pain and the frustration. I think we all can attest. I know for myself, I've been frustrated with certain things that we've seen across this nation, that we've seen in our communities, and that's the reason why we move from speeches and talks, and then we have the ability to move towards policies, and that's what we've done since we've been in this administration for the last 20 months alongside the city board that has passed this. So I commend the city board for passing a number of different things that we can speak to of what we're doing as it relates to justice and accountability, but we understand there's still more work to do. And as we will continue to charge forward and uniting the city and focusing on justice and accountability, and we'll focus on 3 pillars to ensure that we kind of have guideposts, and those 3 pillars will always be justice, equity in our economics, as well as the eradication of racism. And you'll see that from our budget perspective when Mr. Moore and I focus on, we've been having a number of different conversations along with City Director Linehan on how do we focus on investing more in our city, and how do we reinvest more as it relates to focusing, a greater focus on mental health, a greater focus on social services, a greater focus on economic development, being very intentional on what we do to ensure that we have justice and accountability. So again, just want to take time to share with this board what we've done collectively together, and we know there's still more work to do. We continue to have to listen to the pain, the frustration, and agony, and we continue to have to learn, but also we move from those platitudes to policies and protective action, and just want to take this time to say thank you to you all. Meeting adjourned.